Howdy, folks. Well, we've got a little bit of kerfufflery on our hands here. The last WWMJ I recorded featured me fiddling around with Fedora at the end of the video. And yet, outside of all this YouTube stuff, I've been talking about playing around with Kubuntu. So let's actually close the gap, so to speak. Let's close the book on this. And then I can move on to bigger and better things after all this Linux nonsense that went down this past weekend. So I did end up going with Kubuntu, because the whole Linux Mint thing. I also couldn't get the Steam client working in Linux Mint. So I went back to one of those noob distros. I tried Ubuntu Vanilla, if there even is such thing as Vanilla Ubuntu without the more chocolatey type colors of it. So I didn't like the Unity desktop, too much like a tablet. So just like when I originally used Ubuntu in its early days and didn't like the color scheme, I wound up going to Kubuntu instead, because I go way back when it comes to KDE. I used to use KDE and Linux Mandrake back in college. So I'm pretty familiar with KDE, but I had no idea that it became this good looking in such a short period of time. You know, I'm joking about if you never knew like a young lady growing up who had some weird genes in her family and was what they would call a late blossomer or whatever it's called. Basically, everybody else started maturing, as it were, long before she did, but suddenly she played some serious catch-up in her mid to late teens. Yeah, I knew some folks like that. They feel horrible until finally their wacko genetic stuff actually came through for them and stuff. It was actually, basically, Kubuntu is like the Linux version of the goofy glasses girl in middle school who becomes a total knockout by the time you're going to your junior prom. So it's just, I actually knew someone like that too. She went from goofy geek girl in middle school to modeling in college. She swapped her glasses for contacts. Yeah, well, alright, that's enough of that reminiscing on my much younger days back in the day. Of course, much younger meaning what? It's not like I'm over 50 or anything. Anyways, let's fire this thing up. I'll show you just how quickly this thing boots up. Now, just like with the live CD, this thing running Kubuntu 14, the LTS release, I decided to go with the more mature release that had been polished up a little more. There is a Kubuntu 15 that is more cutting edge, but I decided to go LTS because Kubuntu 15 didn't hardly work. They still need to work out some issues with my graphics card, so couldn't even get the desktop to display properly. So, anyways, you'll notice this actually takes longer to post than it does to get into the system. Ready? Here goes the boot. What the heck? I gotta clean the floor in this place now. Little pebble on the floor and stuff like that. Sick the vacuum robot on that later. Okay, there's Kubuntu. Oh, look, we actually have time for like a second to read that it's Kubuntu. And now here we are in KDE. It's kind of cool what KDE looks like here. And so here's what I've installed so far. I've got Firefox, console. Well, this is not what I've installed, but I've made tiles for, or icons for Extreme Tux Racer, the Super Tux games, and Super Tux Kart. I wonder if I could get Play on Linux going and fiddle around with some of my Steam games that way, as well as look for Linux ports of various Steam games and things like that. Maybe bring my GOG games into the mix as well if I transfer them off the other hard drive. The 1 terabyte drive that I have in here is actually... Now, the 1 terabyte drive that I have is actually from the data array in Tuxedo, but it's about 6 months out of date, so I would have to copy a few things over, or better yet, copy onto like this... Oh no, bring the Steam drive over. Update my Steam drive that I use for the Turd Shiba, and bring that over and set it up that way. But anyways, yeah, I really like what Kubuntu looks like. You got your little K menu down in the corner, which is basically your start menu, and you've got all your stuff in there. I've got it in classic mode, so yeah, it's pretty neat, actually. Yeah, Super Tux Kart, and the problem is this is running off of my old Radeon 6 Grand series, so it's before any of the NVIDIA GTX, so the graphical the graphical performance, especially when paired up with the Core 2 Duo that's in this thing, really causes some issues. If you play Super Tux Kart, for example, the frame rate's not going to be all that impressive if you turn on VSync, so you got to either pick screen tearing or decent frame rate, one of those two. But it would be very interesting if Linux can become more of a gaming platform. I know Gabe Newell's interested in that with Linux and the Steam boxes and Steam OS. But if there's some kind of alternative to a Windows environment for gaming, that really would help Linux quite a bit, especially these more noobish distros, as they call them, like the more mainstream ones and things like that. Okay, now I gotta blow all this away and install Hannah Montana Linux. No, just kidding. Yeah, such a thing does exist. Anyways, my intent with the Silver Bullet is for it to be more of a steady player in terms of not making massive changes to the system, and then when I revive the 2005 system, I will probably use that as my system where I do a lot of experimenting and stuff like that. But yeah. Oh, by the way, this thing also shuts down pretty quickly, too. Let's hit shutdown on this puppy here, and turn off the computer. Wait for it. Didn't even see a little Kubuntu flash on the screen, just like that, off. Eat your heart out, Windows 8 and 10 being more efficient than previous versions of Windows. I don't know what it is with Linux, but yeah, I've run into this with Kubuntu, I've run into it with Ubuntu, I ran into it with Linux Mint as well during my brief experimentation with Linux Mint. But I think I'll stick with Kubuntu for the time being, and maybe play with some other distros on other systems, because Linux is extremely scalable. I mean, if routers can run Linux, then maybe I can find something that the Delosaurus can actually run competently besides Windows 2000. Just gotta find something that'll work in that 15-year-old DVD-ROM drive that it has. I keep forgetting there was a format war for burnable DVDs for years after that thing hit the market, so some of my burnable optical discs might not work as well in that drive simply because of how old it is. Anywho, that'll be it for me in Linux for now, assuming that the Linux lunatics can leave me alone. I may fool around with this a little more, or I may not. But I want to switch to some other things for the time being, just for the heck of it, and hopefully some of this toxic nonsense stops. Multimedia J, out.